This is an overview of this course, an overview of working with color and watercolor, and it gives a heads up on what we'll be considering. It also provides suggestions for acquiring reference photos to work from. Let's start by looking at a simple color wheel. The most saturated hues are around the outside, bright, happy colors, primary colors, variations of red, yellow, and blue. The rim blends clockwise and anti-clockwise into secondary colors of orange, green, and purple. All these rim colors seem bright and clean. They are crowd pleasers. These are children's favorite colors, and the Trix Rabbit's favorite colors. Even grown-ups looking at contemporary art get giddy when they see an artist has squeezed, say, a red right out of the tube and muddled it around on canvas. Wonderful colors! Exclamation marks, capitals. But anyone can squeeze paint out of a tube. What is most challenging for a painter is to mix colors to match or to a desired hue, saturation level, and appropriate value. And the most interesting part of the color wheel, for me particularly, is what's inside it. A myriad domain of grays infused with warmer and cooler hues. A quick word on value. Values are tones of gray between black and white. If we create a swatch of gray tones of various values to create a drawing from, we will include black and white. A middling gray tone would be in between black and white. Colors can be translated into values, and a trained artist should be able to estimate the value of a given color between white and black accurately. The whiter or lighter something is, the more tint it has. The blacker or darker it is, the more tone it has. Tint is the amount of white in a tone, but also a color, which makes it lighter and less colorful, more pastel-y. Hue is color. The deeper or more saturated or more chroma it has, the less it is tinted. That is, the less white it has in it, as you can see here. Now watercolors don't use white in general because watercolor is a transparent medium. Adding more water to our paint makes it thinner and more transparent, and so this is essentially the same as adding white. If we want pure white, we just leave the paper white. In fact, we must leave the paper white, which means careful consideration in our painting process. Tone is the amount of black in a color, which makes it darker and less colorful, making it grayer. As you tone a pure color down, it will eventually become black or a close approximation of black. You can, of course, take a toned down color that is dark and close to black and tint it by adding more water, which will make it become grayer and lighter. To tone down, to gray down watercolor, we might add black or a mixed approximation of black. But actually, few watercolorists in my experience use black, and if they do, only with great restraint, because pure black tends to flatten and dull a mixed color due to its homogeneity. Black pigments also affect the hue, that is the color of colors as well, for example, by making yellows go greener. Rather than mix blacks or darks using black from a tube, it's generally better to mix them by mixing 3 primaries or 2 complementaries. Complementaries are colors opposite on the color wheel, pure red and pure green, for example. But you can also use other nearly direct opposites on the color wheel, or, for example, reddish or greenish earth colors, or or other mixed tones. Alizarin crimson and viridian green, essentially red and green, are quite opposite from each other and will mix an interesting facsimile black. A pure deep purple and a cobalt green, for example, makes another. Burnt sienna and ultramarine blue makes a really good rich black. With all of these examples, altering the amount of one or the other color, you can warm up or cool down the mixes of gray that you make, gray or black. You can also mix variations of the three primaries, as mentioned. One of my favorites is yellow ochre, cerulean blue, and alizarin crimson. You might use any of these to make a black or a grey of what I've listed above, but before. But there are others for other situations, and as well, using the basic formulas above, you can add small quantities of other colours in the range of one of your mixing colours. All this mixing doesn't mix a pure black in the realm of pigments, because pigments aren't as pure as the optical colors you find in light in the spectrum. Our mixing produces a world of nuanced grays, both lighter and darker, warmer and cooler. That's most of what the middle of the color wheel is, although here in this example the colors that I've squeezed out are earth colors straight from the tube. By mixing what is on the outside of the color, we could fill this whole center area with thousands upon thousands of nuanced mixes of the complementary primary and secondary colors on the rim of the color wheel. This nuanced sinkhole of gray in the middle is a world unto itself, and that one can be immersed in. For me, it's the real world of watercolor and of painting. I cannot begin to instruct you on the nuances of this complex world. Perhaps just show you some examples when a situation arises. It is something you must discover yourself by painting, and specifically mixing and matching paint and color. This is the value that copying used to have for artists. I've been painting watercolor incessantly for 40 years, and there is still so much more for me to discover. Part of the complexity of watercolor is that we aren't just dealing with inert, homogeneous hues, but rather pigments from chemical and earth substances and elements. Each color has attributes that affect the way it lays on the paper and the way it mixes with the attributes of other colors. This is all part of the watercolor aesthetic, what makes watercolor so beautiful and exciting. I will often select colors from making a gray not just because of the color and tone that results, but because of the way the two pigments interact, perhaps granulating or separating, or bleeding and creeping and creating hallucinogenic auras. This is part of the magic of watercolor. Some of the paints stain and sink deep into the paper, and others sit on the surface, and when mixed they separate out from each other, and if one is warm and cool or vaguely complementary, they separate and create a kind of visual or chromatic noise, a kind of a buzz or an energy that makes a wash of color lively and visually dynamic and engaging and far from flat and dull. I can't begin to reveal this sort of everything about this sort of thing to you in class. Only mention the odd thing in the way that one artist passes on information to another. As is the case with most of what you learn in art, most of it about the nature of paint itself is self-taught. You have to discover it yourself, or pick up tips from others when you work alongside them. An instructor can really only point a student in a given direction, provide the basics, provide a structure for working and visualizing, and this is what I hope I can do for you. Here's my watercolor palette. It's a mess of the very grays that I love so much in the middle. Originally, I tried to place my colors from the tube in an an orderly fashion around the perimeter of the pans. As new colors were acquired, I often had to put them out of order. I don't actually even have enough wells for the paint I'm squeezing out, so some wells have more than one color, and there are blobs of color outside of the wells. If you are starting from scratch, you will have the opportunity to line up your colors better than I have here. But think about it. Arrange your tubes around your palette, spread out the colors that you've bought in the wells, and leave gaps that can be filled with appropriate colors that you might buy in future. But before starting, I'll put in a pitch for painting regularly in monochrome, and more than just monochrome, painting in the absence of strong color with tones of gray. I see a red door and I want it painted black. No colors anymore, I want them to turn black. I see the girls walk by dressed in their summer clothes. I have to look away until my darkness goes. Well, anyway, if not black, paint it. Don't paint it. If you're not painting it black, then paint it gray. I will have us painting regularly with mixed grays. I want us to work with color too, but I think that working in desaturated monochromatic tones and studying the effect of light and shade on form particularly allows us to model with watercolor paint and create form. This facility of modeling form with a brush is foundational and really as important or more important than the use of color. So, if at home you find yourself with 20 minutes or half an hour, try ignoring fussing with color and paint a quick sketch in monochrome. This is something I do frequently myself, particularly life drawing and life painting. In this course, we're going to look at the following subject matters. In the first class, we'll paint objects or still life, if you will, and go through the basics of describing light and shade on form separately from local color. We'll make tonal underpaintings and apply local color to them. In the second class, we'll paint shiny, transparent, and translucent objects. And these are a weird twist on the substance of matter and form. We'll see how our approach in the first class still works with shiny and transparent things. In a third class, we'll look at the figure, more specifically the face, a topography over which light plays and describes form. We'll look at adding flesh tones to monochrome underpaintings. Flesh tones, of course, don't mean pink. There are a wide variety of complexions, and we'll look briefly at how there really is no difference in the play of light and shade on a lighter or a darker complexion. We'll devote a fourth class to looking at simple atmospheric landscape painting and the effects of aerial perspective. And in our fifth and final class, perhaps you can paint what you like. I might suggest that you try painting street scenes, though, if you would like a different subject matter. Something you can do in advance of the first class and each class is to start to assemble some reference photos that you might like to paint from. I will provide some as well, but to find something of your own might give your painting more meaning. However, you really need good reference. It needs to be simple, punchy, well lit, and engaging. Finding or creating good reference for painting is very important. In the first class, I'll provide photos of that fruit, but you're welcome to try your own arrangements of fruit or variously colored objects. Try and take some interesting photographs with directional lighting. Perhaps some vessels and containers of some sort would be interesting. Don't photograph stuff with complicated patterns or lettering on it. Keep it simple. We want to try and express light and shade describing form, and complex patterns on the surface or textures will disrupt this effect. In the second class, you're welcome to try painting from your own photos of shiny things, but beware, you need to have the reflections extremely simple in your objects. If they are too busy and noisy, so to speak, you will find them difficult to paint. So you need a simple lighting scheme wherever you are in the room that you're taking photos of these shiny objects. I will bring some examples, some photographs, provide some for you as well if you don't come up with anything. In the third class, we'll provide some faces to depict. I'll provide some faces to depict, but you can come up with your own reference as well, if you like. If you photograph someone yourself, don't use a flash. Place your subject in a window with light playing across their face, putting one side in shade. Make your reference cinematographic. Take numerous photos so that you can select which works best. Turn the head to create more or less shadow. As well, pull back from the face a bit and zoom in and to reduce the distortion of the face by curvature of the lens. For those of you who know how to draw and understand perspective, this means creating a less forced perspective. That is, creating a perspective that is closer to a parallel projection. For the fourth class, I will have some simple atmospheric landscapes for you to work from, but you might want to assemble some of your own. If you took any photos in the smoke events this past summer, they might be super to use. Mist in mountains might be good. Assemble lots of photos and we can choose one that works best. As well, you might want to find landscape photos that are not just atmospheric, but also have areas that are variously in light and shade to create more interest. When the sun is lower in the sky, you will get better, more interesting results. Pointing your camera in the direction of the sun often works well as it creates more atmospheric perspective, and also rim lights, trees and shrubberies to one side or the other, or both sides, and makes them glow. If you ever have the occasion to drive into the sun, say on the island highway, that is driving southeast in the morning on an autumn day, just look at how interesting the trees and shrubs are at the edge of the road. Then, if you immediately turn around and head north, notice how flat, boring, unilluminated, and uninteresting foliage looks. You might want to keep an eye on interesting cloudscapes as well. Take pictures of them. Watercolor is inherently conducive to suggesting atmospheric conditions like cloud and mist. It's also conducive to painting water and reflections on water. Clouds and water are subject matter that, well, it actually looks like watercolor. What could be better than finding a subject that lends itself to this very suggestive medium? So keep an eye on calm or mildly turbulent water and the reflections upon it, or puddles or wet streets. The more you paint in watercolor, the more you'll notice things in the world that beg to be painted in watercolor specifically. For the final class, if you want to paint urban landscapes, bring some of your own reference. Sunshine would be a big help in that reference. A low sunlight and long shadows will be a great help. Light raking across the front of a building would be good. Long shadows cast on adjacent buildings. Defined areas of light and shadow. I don't like working from photographs. I think that looking intently at the world of form and substance around us is invaluable in today's world, where we rarely look intently at things. The world races by outside the windows on our cars, or images scroll by on Instagram, or we watch movies, moving pictures. We simply don't stop and look at forms and images enough. And the idea of looking at an ersatz reality like a photograph is unfortunate. But for painting, particularly watercolor, it's often necessary. Back in the day, people used to have to make very quick sketches and notes about conditions of lighting and atmosphere. Now we have the camera, and those conditions of lighting and atmosphere are incredibly ephemeral and exist ever so briefly. It's possible, if you're there on location, painting en plein air, to quickly capture in watercolor that fleeting atmospheric or lighting impression. But you've got to be there. You've got to be there early in the morning, probably most of the day until late in the day, or just at the very moment when warm, moist air spills over the mountains and condenses into cloud. You'd have to spend all day outside. I have done this in the past for long periods of time, but it's generally more convenient to look intensely when you see something, when something strikes your eye, and take photos. If you are looking at something of interest, something that looks like watercolor, something that strikes you as a subject for water, you might snap a photograph and supplement it with a pencil sketch in a small notebook that indicates your idea as simply as possible. Making that sketch in a way also allows you to take the time to look intensely at what it is that you hope to capture at a future time in a painting. Whatever you do, if you work from photographs, you must have your painting in mind as you take them. You must have your painting in mind as you look at the light and atmospheric effects before you. You need to spend time staring at the world and dreaming. But try and keep your eyes on the road when you're driving down the island highway.